welcome back. This is the We Out Here Expat Podcast. I am your host, A.S. Turner, and I am here with my main man,
J.K. Hobson, comedian, content creator, and host.
Exactly. And guys, we're going to be talking about exactly why this podcast is called the Expat Podcast, why we are expats and why we chose the expat life. Right. The very first question that a lot of people would ask us is, why did we leave America? Why did we leave, allegedly, the greatest country on earth? And that's
according to a lot of Americans,
Yeah. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying I necessarily believe that, but that is the popular saying. So for me personally, leaving America, it was never really about a desire to leave America as it was the desire to experience a different culture, see different places in the world, and basically have like a personal experience with some of those stories that I read about and National Geographic, or things that I've seen in media. Like, I actually wanted to go to the places where these events were happening, where these stories were being told. And so that was pretty much my reasoning for leaving America. I finally had the opportunity to go and teach in South Korea at a kindergarten, which turned out not to be the best gig in the world. But it was
kindergarten wasn't the best gig in the world.
No, It was not. I know it's crazy to say. It's crazy for me to even have those words leave my mouth, but no, it was not the greatest job in the world.
Arnold Schwarzenegger loved it in Kindergarten Cop. I don't know what your problem is. He looked like he was having a great time.
He probably got paid a very, very nice salary for doing so. Yeah. And probably had an expiration date too. All right, get these kids out of here.
And also, he wasn't having a good time. Maybe you didn't see it. He was like, the kids are driving him crazy, as kindergartens are wont to do.
Yes. But that led me to doing other things in South Korea. And that's pretty much the first country I went to. From there, the expat life was history. What about you, JK?
I'm actually a refugee from the United States. I actually fled now. I originally came to Vietnam specifically. Well, I had been in a band for a bunch of years, and during my time in the band, we did a lot of touring in the United States, and we had the opportunity to go to Japan. So we did a show. We did a music festival in Japan called the Independence Day Music Festival.
Where in Japan?
In Shinjuku, in Tokyo. Yeah. And that was my first time in Asia, and it was really too short. So it was always in the back of my mind, like, I want to spend more time there. And then after the band broke up and I returned to university, I took part in a study abroad program, and I decided that I wanted to teach Vietnamese. I wanted to learn Vietnamese history. I wanted to study Vietnamese history for a lot of particular reasons, which I might get into later. But I did a study abroad program. I lived in Hue, Vietnam for a couple of months, and I really fell in love with Vietnam. And so when I went back to the States, I really wanted to figure out how to experience Vietnam for just a little while longer. So I applied for a Fulbright scholarship, and I won the Fulbright. And then I came back here to do the Fulbright in Mae Tho, Vietnam for 1 year. And during that year, it was 2016. A lot of things were going on politically. A lot of things had been going on in the United States for a few years before that. The Black Lives Matter protests and movement really started to develop. And then in 2016, about 5 months into my stay in Vietnam, Donald Trump won the election to be president of the United States. And at that point, I just decided that I would remain in Vietnam. So it wasn't that I left Vietnam necessarily because of the political, what I considered upheaval happening in the United States. But I decided that I was really happy where I was. I really loved it in Vietnam. I was just learning about a new place, learning about myself, because that's one thing that happens when you're taken out of the context that you've grown up in, is you really get to find out who you are. It's easy to define yourself when you've been around the same people and in the same culture, because you just like, you find yourself to relating to the things and people that are around you. But once you're removed from that context and put into a totally new one, you start discovering like really interesting things about yourself. And I think maybe closer to who you really are. And that journey wasn't done for me. And so that was another part of the reason that I stayed. But definitely what was going on in the United States was also a factor. That's why I joke around and say that I was a refugee, you know, but
well, I mean, there's something really interesting that you brought up. Being an expat helped you discover who you are, because that's one of the benefits that I found as well. Like being abroad, being outside of your comfort zone, being away from those, you know, that you were comfortable with, you're forced to kind of chart a new path for yourself and figure out, you know, what is it that I really want? And what I found out was the things that I was chasing in the United States weren't necessarily things that I was chasing for my own desire or benefit. It was because this is what I thought people wanted me to do. This is what people told me I should do. This is what people told me I'm good at. And so being an expat was a time for me to figure out, well, what is it that I want for myself? What type of life do I want to live? And so it's interesting that we both had that same thought process.
yeah. Yeah, that's true. It's interesting. I was talking to somebody yesterday who's yeah, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who is she's actually Russian and French, and she was talking about visiting the United States from Eastern Europe, and it was interesting. And she said before she said this thing, she was like, look, I don't want you to be offended, so I was ready to be offended, like, what is she going to say, and then she was like, she could basically, to paraphrase, she couldn't see what the big deal was, that people freak out about going to the United States and the American dream. And then she was there, she was like, okay, so there's stores. To be fair, she was in Florida. No shade to Florida, by the way. I love my Florida people. Shout out to Afzal and Born Free Biker Bar in Tampa, Florida.
Trick Daddy.
Trick Daddy. Who's in the news. So you might want to tune into a later episode of the Expat podcast, where we talk about the finer points of Trick Daddy's proclivities, which really say more about his girlfriends than it does about him. But anyway,
hey. We digress. No judgment. Yeah. No judgment here.
Yeah.
As you were.
I just don't want to know. All right. Anyway. So, but she was just basically like, oh, okay, this is what, and I guess she really was more tripping off of the, like, just the capitalist aspect of it, which capitalism is fine, does a lot of great things, I'm not trying to have that argument, but just when it just leads to you walking around, it's like, another donut shop, did they need to put another Cracker Barrel right here? I guess she was, and she's Russian and French, you know what I'm saying? So there's that too. The French have a different idea about what culture is, but I couldn't combat that, where I was like, yeah, okay, so there's stores, great. There's a house, I feel like I can understand how somebody would be expecting more from this place that called itself the greatest country in the world. And yeah, jazz music came out of there, but you don't hear jazz music playing out of every store. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, yeah, I get what you're talking about. I mean, I would say probably her being, part French has a lot to do with that. Oh, this is your greatest nation. This is first world. But the point about donut shops is a big point, because one of the things I discovered when I first left the States, I was close, if not more than 300 pounds. And I haven't touched 300 pounds since I left. Like I haven't gone anywhere near that weight. I've been heavy, I've been close to it, but I haven't necessarily touched it. And so the diet in the States is one of the first things that I came to a realization about. Like we eat a lot, and we eat a lot of stuff that can make you gain weight very quickly in a very short time span. So it's that's probably one of the first things that I realized when I first left. My first 6 months in South Korea, I lost a lot of weight, and a lot of it was just revolved around the diet. Did you have a similar experience?
Well, so I grew up in New York City, and then I lived in Los Angeles for 14 years before coming out here. So, and they're not, I mean, although diet can be heavy, I feel like when I did a lot of traveling with the band is when I saw the places. Like I was, for the first time I was in the South on the regular and in the Midwest, and, eating at Denny's like almost daily and being like, damn, this is a lot of food, man. You know what I mean? Like, and then also maybe not being so conscious of that until I started seeing a lot of the people, and being like, wow, here's a fat family, because you see fat individuals, but when you see like fat dad, fat mom, fat 5-year-old, it's like, how is this 5-year-old obese? This kid doesn't have a job. You know what I mean? Yeah. You're doing that.
Like, and it's funny you bring that up, because fat shaming is like a big deal in the United States right now. Like, people, hey, you're shaming because I'm fat. Whereas, like, when I first went abroad, like for example in South Korea, like if you're fat, they will openly tell you, hey, you fat. You are a fat person. You are fat.
Yeah. And it's not, and the thing is, it's not an insult to your character. It's not as, I think if you call somebody fat in the United States, it's like more like a judgment of their entire character. Whereas they will say like, hey, you're fat. You don't have any hair. People will talk about like physical attributes that you possess that might be, other than ordinary. You know what I mean? But I don't think it's supposed to be assailing your character. But also, along with this culture of like not fat shaming, but there's also like some people are fat and that's fine. You know what I mean? I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, but the thing that did alarm me is when I see a child that is not making their own choices, or I don't think should be making their own choices about like necessarily, parents should have something to do with that. And the child is on a trajectory towards getting somewhere that is going to have detrimental long-term effects. It just surprised me. It just wasn't what I was used to,
Yeah, and you do see that in other countries as well, where especially other developed nations, where you see this kind of McDonald'sization of their food industries. Like, for example, there's in every subway station, whether it's in Korea or whether Japan or China, you're gonna see a McDonald's. You're gonna see a McDonald's at a major station. You're gonna see it. Yeah, I mean, I saw McDonald's like there was like 3 McDonald's in my neighborhood in Korea when I lived there.
Wow.
So I could always get a Big Mac whenever I wanted to, and so along with that, you see a lot of kids there starting to become obese. You see this rising obesity rate, and that's something we don't talk about enough.